meeting. What we'll do is we'll just have a quick round of introductions. Just for me, because I've forgotten people's names, I've got a very short memory. So we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm Ben Kearns, Governance Service Officer.
Quite timely for a book from Shire Beds.
Carl Oxford, Director, African and Caribbean Business Ventures.
Simon Langdale, son of it.
Bobby Tandy, founder and CEO of XR Games.
Rich Paxman from Paxman Cools Limited.
Martin Stowe, Chairman Director of Nexus at the University of Leeds.
Lee Viney, Regional Manager for Innovate UK.
Sarah Bowes, I lead Innovation Digital Policy for the Combined Authority.
Henry Rigg, Head of Business Support at the Combined Authority.
Thomas Newton, Economic Analysis Team Leader at the Combined Authority.
Sue Cook, Chief Exec, 3M Buckley Innovation Centre at the University of Huddersfield.
Peter O'Brien, Executive Director, Yorkshire Universities.
Philip Wilson, Slipstream Engineering Design, I'm the Managing Director.
Alan Williams, Chimera Fabrics.
Paul Price, IBM Ventures.
Maggie Richard on the LET Board and Project Max Limited.
Councillor Jane Scullion, Acting Leader of Calderdale Council.
Phil Wycherley, Head of Business, Innovation and Skills and Culture Policy. Sorry, it's been I've had a long day today.
It's only 2 o'clock. Liz Hunter, Policy and Development Director.
Shabir Pando, Leader of Kirklees Council, and I also chair this fantastic board. We've got some great things to do amidst many challenges. Any apologies?
Yes, we've had apologies from Councillor Firth, Councillor Mason, Councillor Byford, Amir Hussain, Simon Mellon, Palvinder Singh, Simon Wright, Deb Hetherington, Neville Young and Martin Booth.
Okay, thank you. If you've got any declaration of interest, please let the committee clerk know.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I've been on the governance of the Nexus bid for the Stream 3 of the entrepreneurship.
Okay, and again, I wanted to disclose that Nexus and the University of Leeds are leading the Innovative Entrepreneurs Programme.
Yeah, thank you very much. Anybody else? So?
3M Bic is also involved in the same consortium.
Right, okay. Any other interests? Anybody wish to declare? No? Okay, thank you. Item 3, exempt information. Is anything not exempt on the agenda, so that's not relevant. Minutes of meeting held on the 12th of July. Are they, can I assume that they're a current record? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Chair's update. I've got a few things that I just want to go through. Hopefully it'll take about 2 hours. So no, it'll be short. Firstly, you may have heard Brian Archer. He's got another job. So he'll be leaving soon, November.
3 weeks yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And Phil's acting up. Is that public knowledge?
It is public knowledge. Hence my confusion about not announcing my job title. But yes, from the 14th of November, I'll be acting up.
Yeah. So congratulations, and I'm sure you'll do a fantastic job. Next, I've got I just want to touch on what's happened over the last few weeks regarding the new government, and you know there was a lot of issues before the new government came in, and I'll try and be as politically neutral as I can, which I always am, and I will. But the Chancellor, as soon as he came into power, and again this is sort of like well documented, the economy just crashed because the way the budget was announced, there was no checks and balances, and there was no plan in terms of, you know, even Office of Budget Responsibility didn't really actually have any say. And that worries me because as a leader and also who's in charge of a large local authority, but at the same time who actually chairs this committee, I know it's got massive impact on not just business but also residents. And I've just got some figures here. 2 million households will have to renegotiate mortgages after their fixed term rates come to an end. And I've seen some figures around that, and they are quite worrying because on a £100,000 mortgage, 1 percentage point actually impacts around £500-600. So if your fixed rate was 0.8 or whatever, and suddenly it goes to 6%, and you've got a big mortgage, it's really, really difficult on top of everything else. And we also know that Bank of England propped up the gilt, which was something that's completely exceptionally extraordinary. And that cost the taxpayers 30 billion quid. So there was a series of events that were taking place. From a local government point of view, we are already in a situation where the last 12 years has made local authorities, not just ours, but across the piece, half the size as they are, and there are a lot of pressures on us. And that's really, really worrying because, you know, if you don't have reserves, then you're actually in a worse situation than you were last year. And there was an article by the PFA magazine that's identified 60 local authorities up and down the country that could go into liquidation, basically Section 114 notice, which basically means that they become bankrupt. We're lucky, and some authorities are lucky that, you know, we have got a average reserve amount. But you've got to understand that them reserves can only be used once, and if you use them once, then, you know, that's gone. So next year, year after, most authorities will be okay, but if there's no measures that come forward, then, you know, we could be in a worse situation than we are. As quickly as the Chancellor was appointed, Jeremy Hunt came in, and to be honest with you, I was actually relieved because Jeremy Hunt was the Health Secretary, and he did a good job, you know, putting politics on one side because he understood the issues and he understood compliance, which is really important. And what he's done is he's actually immediately taken some measures that's reversed quite a lot of tax measures that were put in place. The health and social care levy, which was going to pay for, well, not pay for, but which was going to help to a small degree adult social care in the NHS, he's not going to reverse that. But those of you who are self-employed will know that there's something called IR35 off payroll. They're not going to implement them changes, so that's going to stay as it is. And he's also froze duty on alcohol duty, because again, you know, they were thinking of doing something around that. Income tax basic rate is going to stay as it is. And energy price, although there was some measures that were put in place, he's not actually gave a blank cheque. And I can understand why, to be honest with you, from a prudence point of view, that he'll review the situation after April, because the things are so volatile that they could change any time, and I'm hoping that things will change for the better. And just by announcing what he has done in a matter of a week or two, that's actually putting £32 billion back into the coffers, so to speak. So hopefully that's going to stabilise the markets. So that's my bit, and you didn't give me that, but I thought it was important to actually contextualise the whole thing. And then what we've got is from what I can see is all the departments, and I was in a meeting this morning at the LGA, and all the departments are working really, really hard to try and make sure that, you know, 31st of October we do get a budget that actually is balanced, it's got you know, credibility, and at the same time, you know, hopefully stabilises the markets. But one thing he has said, that there's going to be difficult decisions to be made. And it just worries me when they say that the low-hanging fruit in local government is always easy to pick, but they have the most adverse impact on society. So that's just a quick update regarding the situation regarding the national government and how it impacts on business and local residents. And I think it goes hand in glove. The other thing, which is a bit more positive news, is we had the West Yorkshire Innovation Festival 2 weeks ago. A week ago, time flies. No, anyway, so Sarah did some fantastic work along with Phil, and the whole week was packed with great stuff. And I went to the 3M Buckley Centre, and I also went to the event in Bradford, where there were, you know, quite a lot of people in Victoria Hotel. And the sort of work we are doing around health tech and innovation and you know, all sort of cutting edge stuff. And when I went to university, it just amazed me, right? Yeah, how far technology has moved on. Because I went to the 3M Buckley Centre a few years ago, and when I went there, I think I've seen it all before, but it was completely new. You know, the whole thing that sort of just churns. We've got a very clear action plan. We're committed to what we're doing, and health tech is something that we will continue to get behind and develop a health tech cluster as we move forward. Also, there was the first meeting of a new Look Business Comms group that took place last Friday. And I was actually supposed to have been there. I was in the building, but because my diary is so busy, other things came on, but I'm sure that meeting went well. Anyway, that's my update, and I hope I didn't go on too long. Item 6, crisis in the cost of living and doing business. We've got Tom and Sarah who will take us through the paper. And this paper really is about making sure that, you know, the issue that we face regarding the residents and businesses, and how this LEP board and the role of the LEP board can help. And we'll get some economic data and look at what our interventions are. So, Tom, where is he? Are you there? Over to you.
Right,
Tom, did
yes,
you
I
introduce yourself earlier on? Because I think we jumped, didn't we?
No, I introduced myself. Yeah.
Oh, right, okay. So
I can do it again if you like. I'm I'm Tom Newton. I'm the economic analysis team leader at the Combined Authority. So I'm just going to take you through some of the key evidence around sort of the economy at the minute. This morning, the ONS released their latest CPI inflation figures, which put CPI at 10.1% for the year to September 2022, which is the highest level for 40 years, apart from 2 months ago when it was also at 10.1%. The key factors behind the rise in inflation are housing and household services, transport, and food and drink. Food and drink in particular rose by 14.6% in the last year, with restaurants hitting 10% as well. So that impact is spreading sort of widely across the food and drink sector, and particularly with restaurants. We're thinking there around sort of discretionary spending that people make, and as the cost of living starts to bite, they'll be sort of the things that are cut first from people's budgets. On actual food costs rising themselves, though, we know that 4 out of the 5 areas within West Yorkshire have food poverty rates above the level for England. So that's everywhere apart from Leeds. And with food costs rising further, that puts those people at an enhanced risk of food poverty. Moving on to the interest rate, at the last Monetary Policy Committee that the Bank of England held, it was voted that the bank rate would increase by 0.5 percentage points to 2.25%. There were some members that would have preferred to increase the rate faster, and one that would have preferred to increase it slower. But I think that the key takeaway is that there's a unanimous opinion among the Monetary Policy Committee at the minute that interest rates need to rise. And it's likely that's going to happen again when they meet on the 3rd of November. We know about the sort of, you know, the emergency measures that they brought in around sort of selling off with guilt, and that's going to commence on the 1st of November. But Andrew Bailey, the Governor of the Bank of England, is committed to sort of interest rates being the main weapon and remaining the main weapon in the fight against inflation. So we're pretty confident that further hikes are going to come in the near future. Regionally, what this all sort of means for us is that the regional econometric model, which predicts growth figures for the region, have been revised downwards. So we've recently undertaken the commissioning of some ad hoc forecasts from Experian, an annual growth for 2022 and 2023 has fallen from 5.7% and 1.7% respectively to 2.5% and 0.5% over the next couple of years. And there's going to be, we think, a scarring effect out to 2028, and that's sort of going to have a knock-on effect for for quite a few years while that sort of lag remains. Moving on to households and how they're sort of faring at the minute. There's quite a lag in fuel poverty statistics. So the most recent official statistics on fuel poverty relate to 2020, where 17% of West Yorkshire households were in fuel poverty, compared with 13% in England. Now, that's kind of an issue because we know that we've gone into this sort of energy crisis on a worse footing than England. So things are likely to get even worse within West Yorkshire than they will on the national picture. So we've got some data from the End Fuel Poverty Coalition that looks at how things were on the 1st of October this year and how they're going to be sort of on the 1st of April next year as the changes start to go into force. And what they show is that West York, there will be sort of around 30% of West Yorkshire households in fuel poverty, or sorry, were 30% in fuel poverty at the start of this month, and that's going to rise to 33% on the 1st of April. And that change between those dates is sort of when the £400 energy bills support is removed. So that's without sort of this week's announcement of the energy price guarantee being withdrawn. Cornwall Insight is sort of predicting that those could increase by 50% again on the year. So really sort of prominent issues for West Yorkshire, above sort of what the country as a whole will see. Just on the energy price guarantee as well, it's worth pointing out that the cap on average household energy bills of £2,500 is still a doubling of bills from the last year, and that's likely to sort of cost the government around £60 billion this financial year, and that can fluctuate because global energy fuels are traded in US dollars, and as we've seen, sort of relatively weak performance of the pound against the dollar, that could rise. But there's been sort of a bit of a resurgence in the pound recently since Jeremy Hunt's statement the other day. Moving on to businesses then, in terms of the cost of energy, if you like, we've started to sort of consider how the support that government offer is going to look beyond this first 6 months. So we know that government are committed to reviewing the support for businesses in the next few months, and we've started to try and model or understand which businesses will receive support across West Yorkshire, and we'd like your sort of input and your opinions on the methodology that we've used. But we've kind of taken a Bayes methodology that they used in 2014 to look at businesses that are sort of at a high risk, if you like, which are those that are energy intensive and operating in sort of competitive markets, and that the importance of operating in those global markets is if energy is cheaper in other countries, then they can produce goods for cheaper, and that it puts British firms at a disadvantage, if you like. And what we found is that there's around 1,700 businesses in West Yorkshire employing at least 57,000 people and contributing at least £8 billion in turnover. Now those figures are quite conservative because the data's come from FAME, which is a database we use linked to Companies House, and not every business has to report their employee figures and turnover, but that is sort of a minimum of sort of the employees and turnover that are in what we deem to be high risk businesses. There's also then an enhanced risk, if you like, which is those businesses that are exposed to internationally competitive markets, but they don't meet the intensity thresholds. and we think there's sort of over 6,200 businesses in West Yorkshire in that sector, employing again at least 147,000 employees and contributing at least £20 billion in turnover. So we're talking sort of nearly £30 billion of turnover that is sort of a high or enhanced risk of rising energy bills, and that's something that we're sort of really keen to get your thoughts on sort of the way we're sort of trying to calculate that. And you know, if there's any feedback you've got on that, then it'd be very welcome. And yeah, I think they were the key points that we wanted to sort of highlight as part of the economic data. So I'll pass over now to Sarah Bowes. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. So the next part of the paper sets out the interventions that we're putting in place at a regional level, and the key one that I want to draw attention to is the Business Grants Programme for energy efficiency to build on the ReBiz programme. That's going to go to the CA for approval on Friday, and that will be able to provide immediate support to businesses for energy efficiency and about £1 million grant funding. The other area I'd like to mention is the Growth Hub as cluster lead for Yorkshire and Humber will be leading on a provision of advice and support for businesses to help them to think about energy efficiency, access expert advice, and understand, more importantly probably, the impacts and implications of the energy price gap and the changing situation we find ourselves in. So the next part of the paper after that talks about the acts of government from a regional perspective, from a CA perspective, and 4.4 talks about how we influence this ending of the business energy cap and what we want to be saying to government, and there's some suggestions in there about getting involved in a conversation with government. So at this point we'll be really interested in the committee's views on what we want to be saying to government, particularly from a business perspective. What's the short-term impact, what's the long-term impact, how are businesses feeling, and what do we really want to be lobbying for at this point from government.
Thank you both for that presentation. So, Mandy.
Hi, so can I just illustrate that from a personal perspective? So I have an aerospace business that exports over 70% of what it makes worldwide. So in terms of the competitiveness, we pay just over 34 pence per kilowatt for our electricity, and we've just been in Seattle looking at competitors who are paying 7 pence per kilowatt. We won't come into that energy intensity piece, and although all the help is really welcome about energy efficiency, if you are in that advanced manufacturing end, you probably do that already, which is why you're a successful business that's exporting. So my question would be to government, what about the really good businesses, as well as those that haven't done their net zero planning, haven't gone down the energy efficiency route, haven't invested in their businesses? How do we support those?
Any more questions, reflections, issues that we can feed back into government? The 31st of October, I'm hoping that they'll listen to us and put everything in place, and you know, all sectors will have at least a plan. I'm not saying we'll be saved, but there'll be a plan in terms of how we can actually navigate our way through this. Andy?
Yeah, okay, just a point on interest rates really. I think another thing that would be good to press government for is continued support for investment, capital investment. The capital investment programme I think ends, the 1.3 super thing ends in next March. That seems like poor timing really. And currently medium-term interest rates are twice as much here as they are in the rest of Europe. So, you know, unless we do something, we are going to be seriously disadvantaged on the very growth agenda that everybody wants.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Jane?
Thank you. One of the asks in your list, in fact the first ask, is about support for vulnerable households, and I wanted to share with the committee a meeting I had last Friday with leaders of place, with large organisations, private and public sector in Calderdale, and they were sharing experience in their own organisations of, in some ways, a new definition of vulnerable. People who were employing a lot of tradespeople were losing people to businesses that could pay cash, that there was a shift, and they were looking at their own business model and seeing ways, if they couldn't wait a month, looking at ways in which they could pay cash. The other thing was that trade-off between people who wanted to come into work because they didn't want to pay the energy costs at home, but equally people who didn't want to come into work because they couldn't afford the transport costs. So each of us as an organisation, I think, have also got to look inward at what is that definition of vulnerable people, working people also claiming universal credit. So I think that ask is an ask for us as employers as well as people concerned about the region. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. At the Conservative Party conference, the Skills Minister, Andrea Jenkins, was fairly critical about the devolution of adult education budget and skills, and in fact the value of Metro Mayors. It's a personal view. I think she's wrong on that on a number of different fronts, and I think she's rode back from some of those comments, but I think it's really important that we emphasise the importance of devolution to addressing the economic challenges that we face in this region, without question. On a positive note, the new Chancellor has made some very supportive comments about the value of innovation, of science, of universities, to get us out of the hole that we're in. So I think, again, we may be pushing a little bit of an open door, but I appreciate, it's a very difficult sort of economic set of circumstances. But I thought just, reaffirming the support for devolution, I think is really important for this group. Thanks.
Thank you. Any more? Am I missing anything? I'll just put just my thoughts together. One of the things I'm picking up is the government folk is saying that decarbonise, get energy efficiency measures, but for us to do that, it's a long-term commitment, it's a long-term investment, and they're saying that in 6 months' time we'll reflect and see what innovation you've done in terms of decarbonisation and energy efficiency. And one thing that comes to mind is the housing stock. To decarbonise that, you've got to retrofit, and I'm sure in business you can give the same examples. So you're not going to reduce your energy consumption by putting in energy efficiency measures, which is a long-term thing. So we just need to understand what government thinking is around that. And the other thing is, I was in a meeting earlier on this week, and somebody said that the pandemic was very different to what we're going through now. I agreed with him, but at the same time I didn't agree with him, because what I agreed was that it's different because the pandemic was a global thing and it impacted everybody in the same way in terms of health. And it's different because the point you mentioned in Europe, the interest rates and the prices are very, very different. But one thing that really concerns me is we don't have the same buffers as we did before when we were part of Europe, and that's got an added implication. And then at the same time, what worries me is how can I put it, the most vulnerable. And you'll get that vulnerability in companies as well. The companies that are good are struggling, right? Yeah, but what about the companies that we don't know about? And one of the things that stuck with me when I met Indra Mukherjee a few weeks ago was stand up those who aren't in the room. So we're talking to people who are actually in the know. But what about the thousands of businesses that don't know, what we're doing? So I think we're just looking at the tip of the iceberg. And one of the things the government needs to understand is the iceberg is a lot more deeper below the surface, more than what they can imagine. And God knows what's going to happen, but it really, really worries me. Farah.
Just to pick up on that, I think you're absolutely right. There are different grades of sort of experience and knowledge within the business community. So you're absolutely right. The iceberg is fairly big underneath, and there is a need for knowledge transfer and education. And I think there's quite a lot of that about. Where we are is where not quite the sort of mandates kind of business, which is very efficient and all of that. But we know what we need to do, but we need that investment, and that's really quite hard because there's quite a lot of education going on through the circular economy networks, the knowledge transfer, etc. But just capex. So I think most businesses, possibly of our ilk, that really just need some capital investment. Just want to say that. And I think it's useful to know that, you know, we've got all types. We've got the ones who are very advanced, those that perhaps just need that capital investment, just to give them a nudge to go ahead and do it, and then those that perhaps need to start, but it's perhaps a bit of a broad brush in saying, well, we all need to start with giving you the information and educating you first, and some of us perhaps don't need that.
So I think some of the comments and some of our the unique response that we need to do for West Yorkshire needs to kind of uniquely speak to kind of the pressures that our business community face and how that's a bit different from the national potentially. And I think a bit struck by, I mean, there's a segue into the next item which I won't kind of spoil, which is on sectors, but we are more exposed than average to the manufacturing sector. We've got a bigger manufacturing sector proportionately, and also lots of smaller and medium-sized operators in that sector. And I feel like the national conversation on the energy price pressures are much more focused on particularly the hospitality sector, which is obviously going to be hit both by energy prices and probably a fall in consumer discretionary expenditure with increases in energy and mortgage prices. But I feel that we also need to be making a kind of strong play for manufacturers, particularly smaller and mid-sized manufacturers that don't have the resilience potentially on this and are particularly exposed over the winter. And I was really struck, I don't know, the figures that Mandy gave, and I don't consider Produce Max to be a small manufacturer by any means, but that kind of five-fold higher price per kilowatt hour in energy compared to a competitor in another market is a pretty striking example of the pressures that businesses are under, and I think it would be powerful putting that case to government. But I do have some, obviously the sea has changed in terms of the Treasury's approach to this and how much resilience Treasury have in terms of the amount of money they can put to this. So I think we need to be making as a region quite a strong play, particularly for manufacturers, particularly for smaller manufacturers. And I hope this committee would endorse us making that approach, notwithstanding the pressures that other industries might be facing within that. And of course, we'll reiterate those points around hospitality too.
Thanks. Just to add to that, if there are colleagues around the room who are doing that kind of crisis planning and what might happen if, and you might necessarily want to share here, but if you're willing to share that with us afterwards, we could use some anonymous case studies or real case studies with government. I think Manny's example is a really good one. If you've got others that you're willing to share, I think that really brings home the message. So please do that. And if you know of other colleagues who would be willing to share their examples, then that would be really great to have either now or after the meeting.
One other thing to illustrate it, to just put some context on it, is that the increase in the bill on my energy with the cap, I have to increase my business by 30% in terms of revenue to just stand still. That would be without giving any employees a pay rise or anything else, which obviously we're doing because of the cost of living. So when we look at manufacturing, often it's, unlike hospitality, it's a disproportionate profit margin. And that is an issue for manufacturing itself.
I mean, can I ask a question, Mandy, of you? To what extent is the friction that's been caused in trade with our largest trading partner, the EU, impacting upon your ability to meet that threshold that you've just mentioned? So is trade with Europe getting easier or more difficult? Because I think that has to be a part of an issue. How do we make it better and easier for manufacturers and our companies?
So I'm probably not a good example because we trade everywhere bar Europe. However, trading in itself is getting more difficult. So we buy a lot of metal. That metal sometimes is sourced originally, the ore, from Russia, and the banks are holding up everything that says RU on it as country of origin. Now, bearing in mind that it was mined 4 years ago, it's been through Switzerland and came into the UK a year before the Ukraine war even started, banks holding payments to suppliers because of that is causing problems. The instability in the currency markets is a nightmare because banks become really jumpy, and you're already in a sector that, in some cases, not all cases, is highly leveraged because of what's happened with Brexit, the pandemic, and Ukraine. So not all manufacturers are in the same boat. Some manufacturers have been really successful during some of those things. But if you're looking at aerospace or automotive, those sectors are really struggling.
I'll put my hand up. Philip Wilson. Within our sector, we sort of electronics, and I think even before the sort of energy price increase, is that the inflationary cost of just goods is the point. Is that, you know, if you look across the spread of businesses and what's overall, just the sheer cost of goods, which is linked to energy because everybody's got to consume it, use it to produce goods, unless you're buying them externally. But one of our things, we buy electronic components. Companies like Deltec will comment on these type of things. That one, lead times are really, really, really long, and the inflationary, false sort of inflationary price point, because there's less in the market, is really high. So 52-week, 2 years lead time on components is like really restrictive in what you can do as a business. Some of them components are being sold to companies, probably in Europe and America, so they can sell goods, but they're in a different, they maybe operate at a different scale or a different priority. But probably for us as a business, the cost, sheer cost of components, that side outweighs energy. My perspective, from an energy perspective, what if you looked at it that actually the energy price is becoming more true to what it should be? I know that there's cheaper costs in other countries and whatsoever that might be, but energy does go up. So it's like, how can you as a business? And I acknowledge there's a very steep sort of point that's very difficult to deal with, that short-term sort of point. But when 10 years ago I was involved in the renewable sector, it was about 14 pence kilowatt. At that point 10 years ago, so it's been very gradual. Energy has been relatively low cost to what it actually is, I think. So how can businesses be more resilient to that generally through maybe energy efficiency savings? But I don't know, it's like competitive against other countries where they maybe have lower costs or it's subsidised. There's a long debate, that one.
Thanks. I just wanted to agree with what Phil was saying about manufacturing sector and that being a really high priority for us. One of the businesses in our network that is in the furniture sector, which I know from the next presentation is a really specialist area for West Yorkshire, was telling me that their bill's gone from 90,000 a year to 350,000 a year. And, you know, for an SME, that is a really big thing to swallow in one go. And they have taken advantage of some of the programmes, the sustainability rebiz kind of advice, and we're really grateful for that, but there was still a big capex demand, as was said there, to put in place alternative measures. So it's the sheer the sheer size of that spike and getting through it is the challenge for them.
Does it with that investment, does it mean that they have a longer term stability? You know, so they invest in that. That takes your cost, your yearly cost out if you take capital. So it makes a big long-term difference. So if the energy prices do come down a little bit, then they're in an even stronger position.
Okay, thank you. Three questions just cropped up in my head. Firstly, I know quite a lot of businesses that had big expansion plans, but they can't because of what's happening. But at the same time, when they do start to expand, costs won't have come down, especially building costs. So that's a big issue. And then that goes back to what you were saying, that for you to actually become more efficient, you need to expand, and it's a vicious circle. The other point is, I was talking to a few businesses locally recently. I asked them, how's the energy increases affecting you? Listen, we're locked in till 2024. So we were like, quite amazing, that, you know, that they've got a deal until 2024. So I think there's there was a sense of sort of, we're all right, you know. So there's an issue there. And the final point is, we've heard a lot of reports, and again it's well documented, that lights will go off for so many hours of the day. Now it's going to be bad enough for households, but as business and firms, will they not go off, or will they go off? And so if they are going to go off, is it going to be programmed? Is it going to be timed? Is it going to be, you know, you can't suddenly be manufacturing in the middle of a process and suddenly lights go off, and you know, and some of the manufacturing that will be taking place, it'll be abortive cost because some of the components that they produce, right, they've got to be produced seamlessly. So that, and this is just some of the stuff I'm picking up from talking to my local business, But I'm sure that the conversation can carry on. Have we got enough there to feedback? Good. Okay, we'll move on to the next item, which is item 7, economic scenarios and sector approach. This is basically our approach to the interventions that we'll be taking through the strategic economic framework. And I've got an abbreviation here, PERN, Place-Based Economic Recovery Network. And we've got Phil here who will go through the report and tell us all about this PERN abbreviation.
Oh wow, we've got some experts on PERN in the room as well, so they might have views as well. But thank you, Chair. I'm presenting the work of colleagues in my team. So Jem Robson, who is on leave this week, and actually Mitchell, who is over there as well, has done a lot of work on this. So thanks for that as well. So what this is about is suspend your disbelief for a moment and imagine that we're not in the middle of quite a difficult economic crisis, and that we're thinking kind of long term about where we want our regional economy to go, and that to shape some of our longer term interventions and things that we want to do, because we haven't had an economic strategy actually on this footprint, a West Yorkshire footprint. We have done a strategic economic plan on the Leeds City region footprint, which is different from this footprint. And some of our competitor combined authorities have had a really kind of clear view about kind of where they're going, what sectors they're going to kind of focus on. So what we want to do, and we've had some feedback from local authorities and other committees, a version of this has been to the local enterprise partnership committee as well. And we're not going to do kind of a deep dive, really detailed strategy. This is not what this is. This is about really focused look about what is the potential in terms of scenarios for our regional economy, and what sectors do we have a comparative advantage in, and when we're shaping kind of future action and our future approach, what do we focus on? So PERN, as you introduced, Peter O'Brien's involved in this too, but it's called the Place-Based Economic Recovery Network, but it's a group of is how that we've got somebody working on that with us, and it's about how we get the most out of our local academic ecosystem, how it feeds into economic growth and our planning around economic growth. And they are doing some work which is really important around this, which is looking at kind of what scenarios we can expect for our regional economy in the next 8 to 10 years. Now, one of the challenges, and I've got a background in kind of economics, one of the challenges is kind of economic forecasts are based on the past. The problem is the past has been a bit kind of unpredictable and shaky with Brexit, the COVID pandemic, and going back a bit further, financial crisis. So predicting the future based on that past is quite challenging. So what we're doing around this work is, and the academics are working with us, is we're going to do some scenario planning about where we can expect our regional economy to move in the next 5, 8, 10 years. And we're going to add colour to that scenario planning by we're having a LEP away day on, I think, the 8th of November. I might have got that date slightly wrong. But in a few weeks, we're having a LEP away day, and we're going to take some of those scenarios there and get some colour to them from the community of people there about what they're seeing in their sectors, what they think we should be kind of focusing on, where things might be going. And within those scenarios, we're going to think of what's the most positive scenario, whatever that we can kind of hope for, and where do we think the average of that will be, and what might we think is the most negative scenario. And obviously, if we take ourselves away and go kind of 15 years ago, we probably think, when we frame that, would we think in 15 years' time we'd be where we are with all the things that have happened in the last 15 years? So that's kind of an interesting point in terms of framing that conversation. So that's the scenario planning. But what I want to focus minds on in this conversation is the approach to sectors. So there's an appendix to this, which Mitchell's put together, which looks at the different approaches. So slide 3 on that appendix looks at the different approaches that LEPs take. So, for example, the North East LEP picks 4 sectors, which are advanced manufacturing, digital, energy, and health and life sciences, which are important for the North East. Right the way up to kind of Cumbria LEP, which picks quite a lot of different sectors, kind of reflecting the different types of economies and one being predominantly rural, one being rural and urban. And we've looked at the kind of data, and we have this wonderful kind of phrase in economics. This is called the location quotient, and what that really means is what's the proportion of people that work in employment in sectors compared to the national average. So we can see, and it was referred to in the last conversation, that we have in manufacturing, we have a much higher proportion of our population employed in manufacturing than the national average, but particularly in sectors like furniture, like textiles, like machinery and equipment. We've also got a higher proportion, and we know this already, in financial services as well. But alongside that, we've mapped the kind of fastest growing sectors as well there. So, and you can see that on the kind of slide 4 here, and we've got a number of sectors that are slightly different to the ones we've got the highest location quotient, but also in the fastest growing sectors. So we need to kind of think about in that granularity, what's our approach in terms of how we treat different sectors and how we categorise that when we're thinking about our design of what we do that's uniquely for our region, but also when we're doing things like the last conversation, when we're kind of making the case to government about what's important for a region, what do we say and what do we put forward. And we've come up with a framework which is copied from the Welsh Government, because we've looked at what other places have done, and we like what the Welsh Government have done because it's quite simple. But we've changed what they've called the different areas in there. So it kind of categorises our sectors into three broad groups. One of them's what we've called the enabling sectors, which are the high productivity, high growth sectors in the region. So for us, that's things like the creative industries, health and life sciences, space and satellite communications, green infrastructure and financial technologies. So these are the sectors that we want to kind of really focus on for growth. And the second area are ones that are really important in terms of they might not be areas where there might be high potential for high growth, but they're really important because they employ a lot of people, and they potentially people in kind of quite well paid roles as well. So we've got financial services and banking, manufacturing more broadly, education, healthcare, and professional and legal services. So many of you in this room represent those enabling and tier 1 sectors. And then finally, the ones that are vital for our sector, for our region, but they're not ones that we have a natural advantage in terms of the fact we have higher levels of employment than the national average. They're more kind of in line with the national average. So they are kind of social care, very, very important sector in terms of the demands that are coming through, food and drink, retail, hospitality, sports and leisure. So I've taken you through what is a high level approach. This is not the final end article. This is work in progress. So we're taking it to you at this stage to kind of get your views, see what you think, see if there's things we've missed, see if you love the approach, hate the approach. Just really, really good to have a discussion around that. In terms of next steps for this work, we've obviously got the session with the LEP away day in a few weeks, which I spoke about. We're aiming to kind of finish with a kind of end article at the end of this financial year, and that will inform kind of how we develop future things that we either lobby for or develop programmes for delivery going forward in the future. So really, really grateful for your views. I'll hand it back to the chair.
Thank you, Phil. Any comments, questions? Monday?
I guess it looks really good. I like the approach. I'm Welsh, so I guess I would like anything the Welsh Government. But I suppose I have to declare that interest. But the thing that I find interesting is understanding where the red lines are. So would we prefer a smaller economy at net zero or a larger economy at not quite net zero? And I guess understanding how that fits together and where our priorities lie would help that. The other thing is I think it's great to see health and life sciences and space and satellite comms on there with the clusters that we're bringing up, which Sue is working on at the University of Huddersfield and we're doing within Space of Yorkshire, so it's good to see those in there.
Andy?
Yeah, I'll just also echo those comments too, saying we really, really welcome the approach. I think we've been calling for this from this committee for a good length of time. So, and it's always been there in the background, but it's really coming to the fore now, which is great. And I guess it hasn't been said, Phil, but this is going to be the underpinning thinking behind the economic plan that's being written at the moment as well, isn't it? So I think the proof of the pudding will be this is great foundations, but as we see the economic plan come forward, what this committee I think will want to see is that we've really changed some of our priorities and changed some of what we're going to do as a result of this bit of thinking.
Thanks, Chair.
Sorry, I forget names. How long have we on here?
A good while. A good while. When I had dreadlocks, you know, then, Chair.
That long time ago.
Yeah, I echo Andrew's point. It's a very welcome approach to kind of forward thinking and a forward looking at a much healthier economic position, hopefully. In terms of co-design, because it does ask about suggestions for co-design, and I'd like to think that we could demonstrate some of our contribution to the notion of inclusive growth and equalities and invite maybe the LEPS Equality and Diversity Committee input into that. As you know, Phil, there are also elements of that with future implications for ENDI going forward. So maybe some of those reports and other things could feature within some of the thinking. And finally, even though maybe the tier 2, for example, food and drink, hospitality might not feature as strategic going forward, there are elements of our constituency in this region where actually hospitality, food and drink is a very important sector with growing implications. For example, Bradford with a very high, populace involved in that sector and a young workforce coming through. So maybe, food and drink could be seen as a strategic element, although more widely it might not be. And clearly under, cultural industries, there are connections, towards kind of regenerational things in other tiers as well. So just a few points.
Okay, Paul, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I've got a comment. Chair, you read my mind. On the technology-driven innovation, there are a number of areas that are going to grow and are protected from economic trends. Things like cyber security, data, process automation and AI, software-driven business models, which really can link to the young talent that we have in the area at universities and so forth, and line that up. And there may be places that the region has not been strong in so far, but if we're taking a 5 to 8 year perspective, there should be areas that we ought to be thinking about. And the beauty of something like a security business model, that includes both software and services. That could be something that we become. World leader might be an aspirational thing, but certainly as a regional and certainly for something for a discussion with the government, given the focus on high potential startups from that kind of space, that would be something that would be very, very interesting for us.
I'm just going to take a lot of comments and then come back at the end.
All of that.
So,
Thank you. Yes, just to flag for the next phase of work, Phil, when you're working into the manufacturing theme, which obviously is quite broad, given what you've seen in the location quotients around textiles, furniture, for example, which are really quite specialist here, are we going to sort of drill down to a bit more of a granular level about some of these niches where, on the face of it, some of them sound old-fashioned, but they really are not, in the sense of what has survived and the kind of modern science and materials, technology, technical textiles, all kinds of other exciting things that are going on in some of these. It would be nice to see that reflected, not just under that broad umbrella of manufacturing. Chemicals and pharmaceuticals as well is another area, particularly in Kirklees. We've just been doing the analysis, give it a plug, Kirklees Top 100 analysis. There's a lot of companies in there that are in that pharmaceutical chemical space that seem to sit under the radar a little bit. So it'd be nice to see a bit more analysis on what's in manufacturing. And then the third area I wanted to ask about is e-commerce. I don't know that's the sector description as such, but the top company in Kirklees was Buy It Direct, which is an e-commerce company that has absolutely grown like several fold in the last few years. And I don't know whether that is a sector category that is kind of showing up yet fully in our way we analyse things, or does that come under something else? So those were my suggestions to include in that next phase of work. Thank you.
So, Martin, and I've got Mandy, you got your hand up in? Yeah. So bring in Martin first.
So just 2 points. Firstly, I love the approach. I think this is a really good systematic approach, and keeping this simple is really important as well because you get lost in the detail. To Paul's point, the types of companies that we're seeing, so either being attracted to the region or actually foreign companies coming into the region, fall really into 3 categories. So there's a lot around health tech and particularly digital health. That's probably the largest single category. So again, thinking about ahead in terms of where our real strengths lie. So I think that needs to be considered. The second category, and these are in order, is around smart cities and sustainability. So again, a lot of really interesting, fast-growing tech startups in that space. And then the third category, which is probably more of a smaller category, is around finance, and particularly around green finance, building again on the strengths of the universities and the region. But again, Phil, you know, if I can share some data with you, if that's going to be helpful, I'm very willing to do that. That's obviously mainly from a fast-growing startup perspective and the types of companies that we're seeing, both being attracted to the region, but also foreign companies as well.
Say actually, Martin, because I think what I read as space may not be what other people read as space. So space is not necessarily about rockets and astronauts. It is about green finance, so the use of space data, the use of AI, cybersecurity, quantum computing, all of those things. So I think maybe what we need to do is put a little bit more of definition around what you mean in some of the sectors, and whether space you mean sort of the upstream space sector, so building satellites, or whether we mean the enabling technology of the space that includes all of those data-driven solutions that you're mentioning. And on that note, we're putting in a bid to do some work on greening finance from Space Hub Yorkshire at the moment, so hopefully we'll get some support on that and we'll be able to develop that a little bit further.
Okay, thank you very much. Can't see anybody else's hands up. Phil, do you want to respond?
Right, I'll summarise all of that. So I reckon all the comments came in 3 broad categories. So we've got a whole section on trade-offs, how we do this in terms of the economic plan. We've got stuff around, are we choosing the right sectors? And we've got a whole space on what I call kind of digital and green. So I think most of the comments are captured in those. So just to respond to some of that. So on trade-offs, I think, you know, when we set out to do this, what we'd really like to do and what is really, really difficult with in the kind of environment we operate, because it's all about trade-offs. We've only got a limited amount of money to invest in this area. So we need to work out where we put, which baskets we put the eggs in. And that does require us to make either implicit or explicit decisions around what's more important, which sectors are more important, what priorities are more important, whether that's kind of net zero versus growth, whether it's around EDI, whether it's around kind of the places and the overall. So we need to be continuing to have those upfront discussions around trade-offs, which might be difficult at times, and how the evidence portrays that. And we'll try and do that in this work, but that isn't easy, and people need to recognise that. But we're really, you know, we've got a group of experts here from different sectors and different types of organisations, so that's really helpful and important. I think kind of on that trade-off point, I mean, Carl knows we spent some time together and we spent time together tomorrow as well, talking about the EDI, some of the EDI issues, and I'm really, really keen to continue that conversation and see what we can do around that, in how we design things. I think that is related to sectors, but it's broader than that, and I'd see that as a broader priority, as the same as the net zero one, about something we want to achieve across our approach, and that's definitely something the mayor and the leaders are really, really behind and keen to achieve. Right sectors, some really good comments. So some of them are kind of underpinning that we have got the right sectors. So the comments on health tech, the comments on space. Sue's point around the granularity of manufacturing, I think, is really important. Mitchell's nodding, which is good because I just looked at him. But because it comes out really in that location quotient and growing sector work. So we need to think about which individual micro sectors have we got in manufacturing. We might take a different approach to that. And of course, we've got an item on the manufacturing task force a bit later, so we can think about how we champion that within that. and then moving on, and it's a bit of the right sector, it's a bit of digital and green. Paul, cybersecurity, digital data growth, Sue, the kind of e-marketing, e-commerce, some of the comments you had, Martin, around smart cities and growth. I think one of the things we're thinking about doing, which you'll see in our wider work, is kind of trying to get a bit more of a wider digital plan. We're doing quite a lot of stuff on green. Digital and green are important. I think it's a question for us about kind of priorities, and again, eggs in baskets, but they clearly are both areas of huge growth. So our regional approach is going to be quite important to that. So we do need to think about that. So in terms of next steps, I mean, my team have captured kind of the comments. We'll feed it in. I hope many of you are going to be involved in the kind of LEP discussion, but really happy to have a conversation offline. And Jen, who's on lead this week, is leading this work, and probably happy to have a more detailed conversation as that's going forward.
Right, thank you very much, Phil, and thanks for everybody's input on that paper. Next paper is pipeline development. We've got a number of programmes and interventions that we've already started, and the committee's involvement has been very, very critical. So I'll just ask Sarah now to go through the vast array of things that we are doing, and then we'll have a conversation. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you. So as you say, Councillor Pandor, this is a paper that sets out the committee's pipeline of interventions as agreed at previous meetings. The two first items as part of this paper, Business West Yorkshire and Innovation West Yorkshire, we had detailed conversations on at the last meeting. Those two projects are now winging their way to the Combined Authority approval on Friday, hopefully. We'll be able to start commencing progress in terms of getting those into delivery. The rest of the paper sets out other programmes that we agreed at a high level to do something around, but these provide more detailed information on kind of the progress we've made to progress these. So this is around digital transformation and a proposal to extend the digital enterprise and evolve the digital enterprise programme that's currently running in the region for future years. A proposal around another enterprise programme to build on what was Adventure, to provide that kind of start-up support to high growth businesses in the region, which we know is critical as we come out of the current situation or go through the current situation. There's a programme proposed around export support and developing that to provide that kind of export support aligned to the national offer that is already in place, and making sure we're not cutting across existing support provided at a national level. And then there's a programme on regional knowledge transfer partnerships and working with Innovate UK to expand or increase the volume of KTPs in the region, either short KTPs that might inspire new businesses to think about doing a KTP, or providing additional funding to support businesses to think about doing a KTP and make it more attractive to re-intervene in the intervention rate. And then one of the processes around an open call for projects around priority areas, as Phil mentioned, where with this committee we can consider what those priorities are and issue calls for open calls for projects to come forward to fill the gaps that we've got in the current landscape. And it's probably worth saying that these programmes that we've put together are very much kind of focused on immediate crisis, supporting the immediate crisis, as well as those long-standing structural issues that we've got in the region and we need to address. But we'd welcome comments on progress across the range of these and any feedback from the committee.
Thank you. Any comments? Robert?
Richard. It's all right. I'll go with Robert if you want. I like the approach. I was a big supporter of both the Connected Innovation Programme and others. Just on the knowledge transfer partnerships, I think that's great. We've done 3 as a business over the last probably 5 years, and adds a huge amount of value for smaller businesses especially. I think that access to the university network and driving innovation is great, so really pleased to see that embedded in here and not sort of separate with just Innovate UK. So yeah, fully support it.
Thanks, Richard. Andrew?
Yeah, I just wanted to say a few words really to the new members of the committee about this item here. The point of this item really is to try to make it all understandable in terms of what it is that we're actually doing with this committee. And I really do point you to item 9, appendix 1, which is page 35, which I think is a really, really good table to explain what we're actually doing as governing in this committee. That, you know, those are the programmes that are being done, and part of our job is to make sure that they're done well. And so it's really helpful to see them laid out, because sometimes we sort of dive into the detail of individual line items on this, and we need to do that, of course, but it's very helpful, isn't it, just to see them all. Partly because that allows us to think, given what we're saying about priorities, do these programmes actually represent the priorities that we've said that we have? You know, and I think they do, but you know, our job is to continue to look at that and make sure that the things that come forward, 2 or 3 of the new things that Sarah was mentioning there, are directly coming out of conversations that people in this room have had. So it's really nice to see that influence process happening. So that's part of what we're doing here, is to influence that agenda. And then the second thing that we're doing is making sure that the Wicklow is getting value for money, for this public money that's being spent, and that's a very serious responsibility that we have to make sure that it's being done well. And again, these line items I think are very, very helpful with that, because the sources of the funding for each of the programmes is often from quite different places, and we've got a couple of sources there. There are even more actually. And if you're involved in some bit of that and not another bit, it's quite difficult to see the full picture. But that's the point of this committee, is that we look at it as a holistic thing, looking at the whole thing. And I would request, building on this item this time, that going forward we have a dashboard that looks at the progress against these items, and that we keep coming back to it in a similar format, so that everybody can kind of keep attention on the big picture and how it's moving forward overall.
Thank you, Andrew. Mandy?
Thanks. It's a really good paper. One of the things I would say is, with the export support, is there is a lot of support already with DIT that maybe businesses aren't using. And so making sure that we get DIT to do their fair share in our region, and connecting those businesses to DIT with their Export Academy and their desks, is really important. And then we can put our money into the bits that really matter, which is creating opportunities rather than the detail of exporting, which DIT will pick up easily.
Thank you. We've got Carl, Lee, and then Simon. See, in the council chamber, I've got a console and it's got everybody's name on it. And I just press the button and it just go lights up. So anyway, Carl.
Yeah, thanks. Mandy, that's the point I was going to make. And just following on from Andrew, because at the last Shared Prosperity Fund meeting, we looked at this helicopter view then, and export came up, and it was, well, what is the added value that 1.3 million will provide over and above what DIT is doing? And not just about more detailed work, but also some of the developmental work where there's a big hole in terms of potential, exporters, that there isn't a lot of provision to, and underrepresented groups. But just going back to Phil's point, and even with this helicopter view, and just keep it simple, stupid as it needs to be, and we need more of that. You're quite right, and Andrew. There are trade-offs, because we're trying to do a lot more with a lot less money than we used to have, and so we've got to work much more smartly than we've ever done before, and there are more cuts to come. So what can we do in utilising all of our experience to be more effective with a hell of a lot less money, but with a lot more experience than we had before? And I just wanted to mention that part, in particular with exporting. Yeah.
Thanks, Carl. Lee.
I just wanted to say that, I mean, the stuff around the KTP is great, and hopefully that will lead to some really good collaboration. But I think we also need to think about how we work in other ways as well. So we have a global innovation program. We support businesses to access external markets. How do we make sure we bring that in alongside what's happening here as well? And yeah, just making sure that we're providing that sort of wraparound support, adding value to what you're doing with our national programs as well. Not just KTPs, but across what Innovate's doing.
Thanks, Lee. Simon.
Yeah, just to add on to Mandy's point, I think it's a really good and important point. I think the innovation element is really important, but then it's the marketing side, and we are very heavy on SMEs in manufacturing that perhaps generally aren't the best businesses at promoting and selling what they're doing, certainly online, because it's a very traditional way of working. So I think some support to really look at what we can do around there is going to be key to make sure that we can make the best out of the opportunities that we're putting into Innovate in the first place. I know there's a lot of work going on with the BIPs, so Global Business Innovation Partnerships. So there's perhaps some way of linking the two things together so we can make sure we can see the full kind of end-to-end pipeline. Would be really helpful.
Thank you. Anybody else? Before I bring Sarah in and then Phil, do you want to say a few words now, Phil, or do you want to?
Sarah can go first.
Sarah?
I was just going to say, no, really, really valuable points, and we'll feed them all through, particularly on the exporting point and the linking with the Innovate UK support and that wraparound piece. So, yeah, thank you.
I was just going to kind of reflect on a few of the points, sorry. So the presentation points I think is really important. I think we're working on how we present that kind of front door and how we direct businesses to the support. So we'll keep you posted on that, and feedback will be valued as we develop that, because I think there's lots of support there, and I think there's that point around leveraging others, whether it's DIT, whether it's Innovate UK, whether it's other things, and how we connect businesses to that support is important, and a perennial challenge in this world. I think on export, I think we need to be upfront and say that we're thinking about that a bit more than we have done in the past, because of EU exit and because of the challenges of it around export for exporters in the region, and because of the fact that there might be a reduction in kind of national support for this overall. So we want to leverage that national support, but we want to think about our own regional offer, because we want to champion export in the region. So that's why we're beefing that part of it up, and that we made a conscious decision to do that. And I think kind of the committee needs to be aware of that.
Richard, you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just wondering where DIT were. They used to be around this table. They don't seem to be present anymore. Which would be
Where
helpful.
are they? Have they given their apologies?
That same thought actually crossed my mind as we were talking about it. So let's take that away, yeah, because we did used to have somebody. So not sure. Thanks. We'll take it away.
Can I just add one last thing on export? We have a lot of SMEs in our region. One of the things SMEs don't have is representation with HMRC. Big companies do, but little companies have to go through a helpline which is now useless. That's the sort of help that helps SMEs not cross lines. If they could get support from people that actually know. If you end up having to go to an export sort of accountant, so somebody like Deloitte's, you're talking about a £40,000 bill before you start, it's not worth it. So getting that sort of help would make a difference.
Yeah, just listen to everybody and the final two comments. I think we're talking about government agencies, aren't we? HMRC, DTI, and so forth. So I think there's a role for the mayor here as well, because one of the things that we're doing is we can knock on XYZ's door, but the mayor has a political role, and I think that's where the interface needs to be strengthened. And one of the things we've got 11 male combined authorities, and they've all got the badge, got the t-shirt, and we've got the first female mayor, which is excellent. But one of the things that I keep on saying, and I think is something this committee needs to think about, and I don't want to answer now, maybe we might want to come back to it later on, is what makes us different to the other male combined authorities. What makes us that cutting edge, that competitiveness in terms of all the business that we're talking about. And I think Phil touched on it earlier on, in terms of, how do we actually get out of this? Because although there's a lot of challenges, I think there's still a lot of opportunities. Because, out of a crisis, right, you get the most innovation that takes place. But at the same time, I think government's going to be pretty tight with this money, and I think we've all acknowledged that. And that's where both with the private sector and the public sector, and I said this when Roger was leaving, that one of the unique selling points for this male combined authority and the LEP in its previous guise was that partnership was very, very strong. And I think we need to do some thinking, and maybe some of that thinking can be done here, in terms of how can we then equip Tracy to then go in that room with other 11 mayors and makes us stand out, and government will come to male combined authorities to actually deliver, because what we do is about growth, it's about productivity, it's about skills, innovation, and everything else we're talking about. Because we can't be doing what other male combined authorities do, otherwise you know, we're not gonna sort of like punch where we need to punch. So that's something that I just like to challenge you back on. I'm not saying you've got that answer now, Sarah and Phil and Liz, but seriously, otherwise I'll be honest with you, I won't be doing my job right, and you know, we'll be failing the business and the residents and our communities, because if TTI, I don't know why they're not here, but they should be here, you know, and the issues around HMRC and everything else, you know, it should be a no-brainer. But anyway, I'll leave it there. Something to think about. Okay, we'll move on to item 9, manufacturing task force. Andy's done a lot of work on this. I've got a few words here, but I won't say them because I know that Andy's going to sort of like, you know, give a lot better presentation than I have. And there's also a document there which actually highlights everything what we've been talking about. So Andy, I'll pass it on to you. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm happy to talk, but I want to thank and acknowledge the several people in this room who've done at least as much as me. Farah and Richard and Sue and Mandy, at least. Sorry if I've missed anybody, but all of those have been on the manufacturing task force.
I learned that hard way. I lost some votes.
Hopefully I got the right people. But that, again, just so that people in the room understand that this is quite broadly based within this committee. It's very close to the heart of what we do. It has been a reasonably large chunk of work. Many hours have been given, and you can see the report there. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to read that and think about it. For either people who have been part of it already or people who are seeing it now perhaps for the first time, it might be good to have some comments on that. People feel that they want to comment on whether it looks right or whether that we've missed anything. And you can see through the missions that we've identified there, the productivity one, net zero, place to buy from. We've just had a big paragraph there on export, haven't we? And also skills. Now, are these the right things to have focused on? We hope so. I mean, that's the point of the thing, but it's not too late to comment on that, I think, really. And the part of the process that we're at now, and today is really perhaps the first time that we start to see that, is having put this report to the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. It's now the turn of the officials to come back and say, okay, we've received your input, and this is the kind of thing that we're going to do in response to it. And you can see already from some of the discussions that we've had already and some of the other items today that this report is already beginning to shape policy and shape some of the priorities and what people are thinking about. So that's great, and we thank you for that. And I think there's more to come on that. You might also, some of the officials might want to comment on some of the things that are still to come. I think maybe a little bit on the Westminster Day might be nice to hear a little bit about, and some of the other programme things that are going to come in response to the manufacturing task force. So mainly I want to say thanks very much for the input of people. Thanks very much for the response that we've already had from the Combined Authority. We've got quite a lot to do, I think, that isn't just to do with the Combined Authority as well. And so that's probably the last little bit that I wanted to comment, which is there's going to be a new manufacturing advisory board that's going to be set up, which will carry forward the work of the manufacturing task force, check that these priorities really are still being looked after, and also steer any new work that wants to be done in that area. We haven't had a first meeting of that yet. There has been some good discussion about who might be involved with it. If you haven't been involved in that discussion, you'd like to be, it's certainly not too late to volunteer or to talk about that. And I think probably next month we'll have a meeting where that will get together. Who chairs that and how that's done is also up for debate. I'm volunteering to do that, but if somebody else wants to do it, that's really fine as well. So that's how it's going to be steered forward, is the Manufacturing Advisory Board. Okay. Just one last comment before I get off. The thing I think that's lightest in the response that we've got here so far is on the skills for manufacturing. I know that there's a lot of planning already going on with that, but that's kind of not exposed here, is it? And it is a passion of the task force, particularly on the apprenticeship side. I kind of sense that talk of apprenticeship isn't always welcome. People are a bit kind of, do we really want to do that ish about it? And I'm here to say, yes, we really do. And that actually that advisory board has got a massive role in stimulating demand for that mode of training and making it very clear to all the providers that that is what we want and this is how it's the way to be done. If I'm right. But you know, that will be what the advisory board will have to comment and think about. Alan, you might have some thoughts on that on apprenticeship as well. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Can I bring Mandy and Farry in because they've been part of this, and then I'll bring Jane and anybody else in that's put their hands up. So, Mandy, do you want to say a few words? You've been part of this, and then Farry.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the speed at which we actually produced that really encouraged me. Anecdotally, I met somebody on the task force at Sainsbury's on Sunday and said, "Oh, I hope this continues." So there's still an awful amount of energy there and a desire to continue the work. Obviously, the priorities we identified are there, and it's now how we take them forward.
For me, it's good to see the whole of manufacturing in West Yorkshire come together rather in the disparate way it's been in the past. So to get that one voice for a sector that's so important, when jobs almost in West Yorkshire is really important. And it was great to see the Mayor's involvement in that too. It's a key area for her, so pleased with that. And love the paper, love the report. Mitchell's done a great job with that. The only thing I would like to say is we launched it at Produmax, and we're not near Bradford, we're in Bradford, and we're really proud of it. So if we can change that, that would be fantastic.
Thank you. Glad that you're proud of being in Bradford. That's great. I was pleased that Andrew mentioned Mission 4. That there was one sentence compared to the other missions. One of the things that I would like to see in the expansion of that is skills for the future. You know, not just the focus on skills, but the skills for the new jobs, the new kind of things that we're going to be doing in the future, and links to productivity and innovation that we've talked about before. So in that expansion, if it could make the point, it's not just skills of bending the metal we used to bend, but it's actually skills for the future.
Here, good point, Sue.
Thanks. Yeah, it's really good to see this come to fruition, and I was particularly pleased to see that the productivity theme is still really strongly embedded within here. Thinking back to the days before this committee existed, through the big panel, the pilot work that was started a few years ago. Back then, working with local companies to really measure productivity and work out exactly how to improve that is still kind of a thread through this. The West Yorkshire Productivity Index theme, I know we've been involved in helping a little bit with that from Huddersfield, and I would encourage to not put that in the considered for later box, but to sort of keep moving with that on the action plan table. So we're happy to help to continue to evolve that piece of work to move it forward. Thank you.
Sue, Mandy?
I have to respond to Jane's bending metal comment, as I bend metal. I guess we will still be bending metal or printing metal. It's just the way we do it and the sectors that we do it for. So all of those things are still really important, Jane. It's just going to be a different maybe focus. So yeah, bending metal is still cool.
Alan.
Yeah, thanks. No, I think it's a great report. I've been in manufacturing all my life, so it's well pitched. I think the 4 missions are really well defined. Back to your point, Andrew, apprenticeships, yeah, absolutely critical, certainly for us as a business. So many people have left the industry, and we're all fighting for the same skills. It's just driving costs up. It's getting very, very difficult at the moment. So apprenticeships has got to be the way to go to bring those people through with the skills that we need for the future.
Thank you. Anybody else? Asma.
Sorry. Yeah, I actually was at Produmax when it was delivered so very well. It's a very well written report, and a lot of hard work's gone into this. So really, I hadn't appreciated the different level of manufacturing alliances. And I agree with you, the one voice for bringing these manufacturing alliances together is most definitely going to be beneficial to the industry sector. I also focus on the skills for manufacturing. I go back to the point that the Chair has made in terms of in a crisis there's an opportunity, and I do think from a diversity perspective that whilst we're searching for these skills, it's probably an opportune time to look at places where we haven't ventured to try and upskill those schools, those apprenticeship students, and just think a little bit out of the box. I think there's an opportunity here, and I'd love to see how that develops.
Thank you. Have I missed anybody? No, I can't bend metal. Oh. Phil.
No, thank you to the team, and I think lots of things around manufacturing, advanced manufacturing things sort of tick my box a bit. But one of the things I like to look at things is to try to present the vision of what you see, and we talk about some of them things, and like the green perspective is, so it's like aiming for net zero thing. But I like to sort of think about as a group what that might look like in the future, and you're kind of presenting that, but maybe that stronger vision sort of point, because the rest will follow if your thinking and vision that is here comes across maybe a little bit stronger in that sense. I'm happy to talk about that, but how I see things, but because if everybody's buying, what does the green thing mean? What does it mean to business? What should it look like? Is that, to encapsulate the things that we discussed earlier, energy, and where maybe renewable energy is generated on site if needed, so that becomes sort of decarbonised, and if that's possible, that's a good thing, and that's stabilised. So how does it really look as a vision, and then that gives some guidance then. But no, really good. Well done.
Monday. Yeah.
Within the report, it's under skills, we talk about changing the perception about manufacturing. I think we probably need to pull that out further up on reflection to say that we don't need to do that just for skills, we need to do that generically so that manufacturing isn't seen to be, not a modern thing to be doing, but actually is the thing that makes the computers that people use in the digital sector, makes the scissors that hairdressers use, make the clothes that we all wear and the food and drink. And we need to start to change that narrative and make manufacturing cool.
So that's an example of how to sort of what I'm trying to say and engage on that, and then the rest sort of flows.
Phil. Any more? Anybody else want to make any final comments or any queries? No? Yeah, thanks very much. Excellent report. We've got a target there of 2028. And there's a lot of things to do. The question I was going to ask you when you put your hand up, so how are we going to monitor all this thing?
Well, that's what I was going to say. So that we're from line. So I think there have been lots of comments across the whole range of things. I think there's a bit of a kind of headache for Ben because a lot of them are in the realm of skills, which is part of this plan. And I think there's probably a case to bring something on that skill specifically, but all the business aspects. So maybe to have a bit of an exploration of some of those points at a future meeting, we'll work that through. I think that kind of like energising and promoting the sector and making it attractive and not seen as something that is in the kind of ether of perceptions and gets a wider, more diverse range of people to it is definitely a space we want to be in. The industry needs it, the region needs it, so we are thinking about that and doing that. I was going to suggest, Chair, that we probably come back with a progress report on this, and I think kind of, I don't know the exact dates of meetings, but a couple of meetings time in the late winter, early spring feels like a good time to do that. So I think we should, Ben, probably put that on the forward plan if the committee are happy with that.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So at least we can sort of track it and make sure that it's not just something that's come here, but we actually put some effort behind it. Yorkshire saying put some oomph behind it. A technical term, like bending metal.
And if you need support for the Westminster Day, there are lots of manufacturers around this table who might fancy a day trip to London to go and highlight our sector.
What are we doing?
Yeah.
Westminster Day.
So the Westminster Day was something you suggested, Councillor Pandor, and we talked about kind of going to.
Just remind me what I said.
So this is about.
Life as a leader is not easy,
This is about a group of political and manufacturing leaders taking West Yorkshire's manufacturing assets to Westminster to talk to government about how important the region is, the great things we're doing, a bit of a chance to promote ourselves, make ourselves more attractive to a wider skills base, and a bit of a chance to kind of badger the government, because we can only control some of this. And I think we're working that through and what that looks like. It's not been helped by the fact that there's been a bit of noise in who the government is, what they're doing over the autumn, but it's something we're hoping to do soon. So I think we're really interested in people from this committee to coming along and doing that and making it kind of quite energetic and different to what is usually.
No, you've reminded me that that's a great idea, and thanks for following up.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you're thinking, right, I told you that 2 years ago what's happened, but I only talked about that a few weeks ago.
Yes, that's right.
So you're doing really well. You know, saying that you're acting up, carry on the good work. Anyway, but thanks a lot for that. And Sarah, thank you for that report, and Andrew for the hard work that you put in with the few people you mentioned. We'll move on to the last item, which is the Enterprise West Yorkshire programme update, £6 million gain share funding programme, part of the Combined Authority's recovery plan. Henry's here, who's going to hopefully tell us all about this and what we're doing. Henry, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, well, I mean, I think hopefully the report is quite self-explanatory, but it is just an update on where we are with the programme as a key programme that this committee has got oversight of. I guess I'd just highlight a few points. We've now got the startup managers in place in each district who are embedded in the local ecosystems. We've also had launch events now in each of the 5 districts, with the most recent being in Bradford City Centre at the Carla Sangham Centre. They've all been great events, really well attended, a really good buzz in the room, and some great presentations from entrepreneurs that have set up their businesses in this region, and hopefully you'll get a chance, if you haven't already, just to look at some of those links and some of the blogs and a case study of some of the people that we've supported, just to try to bring it to life a bit more and make it a bit more real. Week after next, we've got our first Enterprise Support Forum, which will be at Dean Clough in Halifax. That's where we're bringing together the ecosystem across the region again, to make sure that we're looking at how we can work more effectively together in terms of referrals, and sure there's no crossover, and look at where the gaps in provision are moving forward, because by no means is this a complete package. There's lots of additional things we can be doing with other partners across all sectors in relation to business startup support. So I think that's probably all I would say at this stage, Chair. It is really just for info, but as ever, if any committee members have got any thoughts or suggestions for how we can improve our target delivery more effectively for those interested in setting up businesses or considering what's involved in setting up a business, then we're always happy to have that discussion at any point. Thank you.
Hey Henry, thank you, Chair. I'd really like to have a chat with you offline about the technology-driven startups and how we're thinking about supporting them. What is our data showing? Are they coming through? Are there blocks? Are there things that they need? And do we have an innovation ecosystem locally that's maximised to support them?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Any more comments, Mandy?
I think it's a great report. How do we then get startups to scale up? So what's the next stage? If we're going to throw funding at starting businesses, the idea surely has to be to try and scale those up, and it's really difficult to get funding to get to the next level. So how we put in angel investor type days, how we get the people to those away days where there are lots of businesses there looking for funding in a Dragon's Den type of thing. We need to start to think about that, because there has to be a roadmap to where we're trying to get to.
Thank you, Mandy. Sue?
Yeah, just to congratulate the programme on the EDI performance on page 61. It looks like it's ahead of target by quite a long way on each of the 3 areas, so well done, really. I know that was one of the Mayor's big priorities for this, wasn't it?
Yes, thanks. Any more comments? You want to come back in?
If I can come back, Chair, just on Mandy's very valid point. So work stream 3 of this package, that is very much focused on those innovation-led entrepreneurs, high growth, super high growth, So that will have a lot of that. Make the investor understand what the investors are looking for. Dragon's Den, angel investment type interventions, and we want to learn what the best interventions are there, and then try to build that into programs moving forward. A big part of this is trying to get that finance ecosystem a bit more sophisticated and get a bit closer to it, because it moves really fast. And there are lots of funds out there that we really do need to start building better relationships with. It's a bit of a chicken and egg. We're trying to attract more investors, angel investors, seed corn investors into the region. They want to come and see the enterprises that they could potentially invest in, and this is the type of program that's trying to do that. So we just need to get a bit smarter about how we do that, I think. But yeah, it's a very good point.
There was a really fantastic business at the West Yorkshire Innovation Network Innovate Day, where a starter would come to Nexus actually to become a startup because of the environment that we have. And I think that's something that it's not just about getting enterprise within the region, it's attracting startups to the region too.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, we are starting to attract both angel groups but also VCs, particularly niche VCs that in the past have been focused on the Golden Triangle, actually into the region. So that's starting to happen, and I think that's a really great indicator. The other thing I would mention is about the Northern Gritstone Fund, 215 million. The idea is to actually, for that to increase next year up to 500 million. That I think is very significant for the region as well. And that's predominantly spin-out technologies from the university, but a proportion of that fund can be non-spin-out. So again, and that proportion is higher the larger the fund is. So I think that's quite significant.
Thank you. Lee.
Yeah, I'd just like to highlight the Investor Partnerships Programme that we're running at the minute. It'd be really good to push that out to any of the partners that you might be working in the region, because we're essentially aligning our grant funding to their investments through that programme. It's a big national I think, off the top of my head, it's £80 million that in the programme that we're aligning to investors.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Monday? You looking at me or just looking at me? Okay, right. Okay. Thank you. Just for information, on the 2nd of November, Enterprise Support Forum will be there'll be an inaugural meeting. So I don't know, is that up to members of this committee? Yeah, it's free. If you want to attend, I think it's only fair. See if you can get some information out. If you are free, please do attend. It's under item 2.14 in the reports. Okay, that's the end of the meeting. I've got any other business. The next meeting is on the 24th of January. It seems like a long way, but Henry.
Sorry, Chair, I should have mentioned this before, but I think Carl just wanted to say something briefly about some, under AOB, if that's okay, about some work he's been doing with the Combined Authority. Thank you.
Come to me first.
Sorry?
You should have come to me first. It's good that I'm a flexible chair.
Well, I was going to...
And it's good that you've spoken to Henry, because I'm assuming that it'll be okay.
I was going to do it more diplomatically, Chair. I was going to pitch it on the... Because normally you do a round robin, don't you, under AOB. So at that point, I was gonna follow protocol. Maybe. But thanks, Henry. Yeah, and it's just for information for committee members. Chair would come to yourself and Andrew or Andy, whichever when you get when you chair, you can call him Andy. When you're not, Andrew. And it was just kind of building on from the last point, really, around enterprise support and the wider kind of business ecosystem of the Combined Authority. And members of the committee will or may be aware that we have a kind of notion of golden thread that cuts across all the LEPs of Micah's business around inclusive growth and EDI. And to be honest, there's a way that you have to, there's a kind of responsibility then to demonstrate impact based on practical intervention. So for some of us, it's about being able to, as it was just said there, it's very, positive and, commendable that we've succeeded and overachieved on targets such as EDI, but you don't get there by magic, and osmosis is for fools. So you actually have to have, a very pragmatic approach to doing those things. So one of the things that we've done with the Combined Authority, Henry's team, linking in with Phil and the policy team through James Flanagan, is look at how do we maximise the potential for, contributing to the local economy through, certain kind of underrepresented groups in the region, in the sub-region of West Yorkshire, within that space of inclusive growth and EDI. And we picked on the African and Caribbean community as a target group to engage with, to see to what extent they're aware of what the LEP is and to what extent they are engaging with LEP programs, in particular with enterprise. And just, in response to something you said earlier, Chair, about along the lines of, looking at what other LEPs are doing and what we can maybe learn from and maybe emulate from them. Well, one of the things that we found through our research, actually, that West Yorkshire LEP is one of the most engaged LEPs in the country. In our research, we found that this LEP actually was known more by the wider populace than most of the other LEPs in the country, which is, something to celebrate with the officers in particular, and obviously the non-exec where they've contributed to that. And so we consulted 4 key stakeholder groups. So Henry, Brian, and now Phil's team in the business support services, and looking at the growth service and others, and to what extent their what they were doing was being engaged with the Black African Caribbean Black community, and to what extent the Black community were aware of what they were doing. Then the second group was the wider federations of business support, like the Chambers, Federation of Small Business, and others, and to see what they were doing and how Black communities were taking up their services. And it's worth mentioning that Black people, and it's been demonstrated empirically over the years, are the least likely to start in business and the most likely to fail. 2 key stats that nobody wants. But there are reasons for that, and some of those reasons are captured in recent publications by NatWest, by Lloyds Bank, and now by our research. So there are reasons, but the reasons have been there for 30 odd years since I've been involved in this kind of work. What we need to do is stop researching what we already know and actually do something practical about it. So the third client group that we consulted with were the beneficiaries themselves, people who may start business and those who are actually in business. And the fourth group, which is a very important group, is what we call intermediaries. And this is the kind of social capital that exists in any communities. And these are people who run, community organisations, who are the go-to people for anyone, the kind of informal business advisors. And the key role that they play in advising and referral, that's not actually, on the radar of a lot of the business support kind of professionals. And we captured all of that, and we come up with a number of recommendations. It's not going to be rocket science. I will share it with you clearly, Chair. I don't know what Henry was indicating. Of course, I'm going to share that with you before the meeting. We'll put on the agenda the next meeting and do a presentation. I've got myself and a colleague, Michael Brown, and it's, we're not talking about things that are, are going to be, take over the world in terms of, sliced bread, but, as we're going to try and work in a smart way with Phil, with Henry and others, and just try and make that difference with, the context of where we are today. So just to let you know.
Yeah, thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Carl. It was a great report, and I think it aligns to some of the stuff we're wanting to work on. I think that's a trail for the next session where we'll present the thought in full, and Michael come along as well. I think there's something we need to think about EDI across all characteristics as well. So thinking about our overall approach linked to that. I think there's some really, Carl's right, there's some really striking stats, and there's a North Star report and there's a Lloyds report, which shows Lloyds have produced data showing there's more discrimination against Black. It's been rising in recent years when they're going for access to finance. So there's definitely an issue we need to work on, but we need to also work on that aligned with the needs of kind of women entrepreneurs, South Asian entrepreneurs, disabled entrepreneurs as well. So I think I think there might be a wider item in this as well, but I don't want to take the kind of the kind of limelight away from Carl's report at the next committee.
And sorry, Chair, and that's right, because our report wasn't, just meant for a black audience, but it was to give an indication of EDI and inclusive growth using a black audience. And what it was useful, and I think, Henry, you might agree, what it usefully did was also get the WICA and the LEP to look at evaluating and getting some feedback, even though I'm sure they do that, in qualitative ways anyway. But it was a real good opportunity for some feedback generally on business support from the constituents out there.
Farah.
Just to sort of ask for Haley, so are you envisaging this developing into a fuller dicing and slicing of the community and looking at, how different sections are impacted in, using this as a bit of a pilot?
Yeah.
And then, very aptly, you've said this isn't really just about the analysis, but actually what do you do to address that is the most important thing. How can you put in the support, whether that's, it's anything from finance to education to, whatever it might be. That's the most important bit in this, isn't it?
I think it's we need to have an open discussion around what this means for different communities and how we approach it in terms of our business support offer. You'll see in the stats for what Henry presented earlier that we've had some success where we've targeted. So we've met in some of that enterprise program that Henry presented earlier. We've beaten our targets across all the different groups. So when we have targeted things, it has worked. But we need to understand the communities working with. We need to do that. So I think it's all about trade-offs, but we want to have that open conversation the way we probably haven't done before. So I think I'm really, really happy to kind of take away and have discussions around this. I'm really, really keen to do this, and I think we should be keen to be kind of challenged on it as well, because we only make progress if we have that challenging debate around this, and whether that's within this committee or outside this committee, I don't mind.
One more point and then we need to move on, because I need to have my final say on this.
Just quickly, when we look at that and we look at ourselves, is it possible to pull in the other actors in innovation, so the banks, Innovate UK, all of those places, to see what they're doing in our region and whether we can be a good pilot for something to improve things more widely?
Yeah, a lot of thinking to do. Is there anybody else who wants to talk on this? Because I think it is important, and if you have anything more to say, anybody else, put your hand up. Or right, okay. I completely understand what you're saying, Carl, but let me tell you my story. Before I became a councillor, I used to do a lot of work in my own community, like you do. And then you start doing stuff a bit more broader. I'm from a Gujarati Indian community, but then there's also Pakistanis where we live, and then you start to get involved in more and more work. And then somebody said to me, "Yeah, you should be a councillor." So I said, "Right, okay, no worries, but I can't because I work in Kirklees." He said, "Don't really get a job. So when you're young, than what you have now." I went over the Pennines and got a job in Oldham, and then in 2008 my leader said, "Oh, we're in power now, so I want you to be the cabinet member." So you start saying, "Okay, no worries, I've got a bigger remit." And then a few years later on, I said, "I could be the leader and I could actually do more stuff." And then I became the leader in 2016, and then the Combined Authority started to sort of like get its act together in terms of the evolution. So you then start looking at West Yorkshire. And then while I was the leader, I also became the deputy chair of the LGA. And because I did that job so well, they said, "We want you to chair a policy board," which I am starting to chair under culture, tourism and sport, because there's massive issues there. And then at the same time, my leader of the LGA and the leader of the party said, "We want you to join the Council of Europe." And that's where I'm going to live on Sunday, which is about human rights, rule of law and democracy. So you can see where I'm going with this, can't you? I think the more we get involved, the harder it sometimes gets to actually start to address it, granular issues. And I'm really, really pleased that you brought this forward, because a few years ago when I talked to you, we were talking about the black community, which is really important. We have a massive black community in Huddersfield. And you're right, they are probably the least engaged. They're probably, in terms of education attainment, they're sort of way off the league table. And in terms of businesses, they probably do fail the most. you know, I'm really pleased that you've already had a conversation with officers, because we do need to actually just understand what we can do around this, and make sure that that golden thread you talk about is actually weaved in every single thing we do. And when you talk about equality and diversity, it's so broad. But then what we need to do is we need to actually look at stuff in a sensible way, based on evidence. And at the same time, you know, if your business case is there, and I said this to the Innovation and Diversity Awards ceremony a few weeks ago, that, you know, it should not be that, you know, we are doing this because of the reasons you mentioned. We are doing this because it makes business sense, of course, as well, you know. So yes, there's a lot of work we need to do there, but I'm really pleased that you brought this forward, and I'm pleased that, you know, the comments we've had. So there's something that we need to just bring back actually today. But you get the story. The more you get involved in, the harder it gets, because people say, "Well, you're the leader, you can do that." I can't do anything, you know. I've got to follow the rules and the regulations, right? Yeah. I'm not Boris Johnson, but anyway, that's a different story. Anyway, look, it's really been great sharing the meeting, and I really welcome and value your contributions. You know, my apologies. I get my kids' names mixed up, and I've got 2 boys and a girl, and I keep on calling my son what my girls are called. So, you know, but I think this shows that, you know, we need to actually meet more often like this. You know, I know the next meeting's in January, but if we can do stuff in between, that's really, really good, that we get that team working together, because the agenda's massive. And one final point, what Carl mentioned, you know, we want to be a combined authority and a LEP that actually gets noticed even more than we have been doing in the past. So I think we can do that. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.